So friends, good evening and welcome to Christchurch for this Friends of Christchurch sponsored public lecture given by Martin Palmer. It was actually 5 months ago. Many of us heard Martin on that live webinar about a new normal and all that's happened for you personally and for us in Swindon over those 5 months. And so tonight we've called celebration in the midst of anxiety and fear. And hugely aware of what's happened since then. Some of you will know Martin's been on Pope Francis's encyclical on COVID-19. I'm delighted that my dear friend, Canon John Cunningham from Holyrood is here tonight. And we had a really good time, a lot of humour and laughter in the vicarage before tonight over our pear crumble. Having to Gervin Senior for his pears today and a new recipe would be thoroughly enjoyed tonight. So very ecumenical pudding was served up. Good to see laughter in church, and that's really important. So, plan for the evening is after I've said us a brief prayer in a moment. Martin will speak for 40 minutes or so. One of the films he'll use, Celebration Earth. There'll be a very brief 3-4 minute pause for any questions to be written out for me, which I can then ask Martin with Phil's help. And then we will be over soon after 9 o'clock, at 9:15 absolute latest. So that's where we're going tonight. We welcome all those watching on the live webinar tonight. This is part of our practicing for getting ready for Advent and Christmas. So we're grateful for the friends sponsoring this tonight. And also those watching the recording of this beyond websites, closer to churches in a few days' time. So welcome all of you who are here tonight. Be quiet for a moment as we pray for God's world. So we pray for our town of Swindon, for all those living with COVID at the moment, for our hospital, for all those who've shown kindness. Thank you for the news that we were the thoughtful capital of this country and all the thoughtfulness shown by so many people over recent months. Very conscious of the wider ecumenical dimension of the world. As we hear tonight what's happening around the world, we pray for the ecumenical spirit to hold us strong as a human family. Pray for you, Martin, tonight. You will know God's blessing. We thank you for the Palmer family that brought to this church in past years and in recent times. Here at Christchurch, we're doing a sermon series, How Then Shall We Live? And this book, A Heart for Creation, from Iona, and this prayer has been locked to us, which I commend to you all. Gracious God, share with us your heart for creation, that we may cherish all life, working together to heal the damage we have done, knowing that in all our struggles, you are beside us to inspire, strengthen, and transform us. This we ask in Jesus Christ's name. Amen. I want to say also grateful thanks to Sue Mansfield for this wonderful icon, which is just about finished, and really appreciate this incredible gift, ecumenical gift tonight, and more about that later tonight. So Martin, a warm welcome back to Christchurch.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much indeed, Simon, and it is a joy to be back here. So I am reminded, I do find this slightly daunting. And it reminds me of when my father was vicar here and songs of praise came. My father was 6'2", and the kind of man you never looked down on, really. And there was a very dramatic moment in the program when he, towards the end of the songs of praise, he stood here on the steps to give the blessing, and the film camera crew had a cameraman up there. He did an aerial view on him. First time that most people knew he was bald. He was mortified, absolutely mortified. I think it ruined songs of praise for him. But it is lovely to be back here. I mean, I have very fond memories here indeed. And I have to say, and I think I've said this to you before, Simon, my major memory is of up by the altar on midnight mass when I was 17. And I used to help my dad with being his server. And I just got a girlfriend, very amazing Greek girl. And we'd been down at her family, and we had, does any of you remember those dreadful drinks called snowballs? Ah, I had about 6 or 8 of them. And I had to serve my father, which meant holding the wine and the water. And I just remember not being able to see where the wine and the water was, and thinking, I'm going to drop these, and kind of looking at my dad and going, and he just very quietly took them from me and poured them in. We had a little discussion the next day. But that was him. But it is lovely to be back here. This is a very beautiful church. I travel up and down on the, well, I still do a little bit on the train line. And I always look up to see the spire, the old lady on the hill. So it is wonderful. And thank you all for coming out tonight and being here in the midst of COVID. And to those of you who are at home, thank you for joining us. And I hope something of the spirit of being here carries forward. What I want to explore tonight is something that is quite unusual in our current discourse, which is the notion of celebration. Celebration as an antidote to anxiety and fear. To take you on a little bit of a journey. But as some of you may know, because I think I spoke about it when we did the purely virtual one, I was involved with a thing called Celebration Earth. This came about, excuse me, this came about because I've worked as religious advisor not only to Prince Philip for the last 30 plus years, 35 years. It's had its moments. The food's good, and but he's great fun to work with. Actually, I tried to retire 2 years ago, and the organization that he and I set up, called the Alliance of Religions Conservation, we closed it and we span out 3 separate organizations. And I thought, great, that's it. I've actually ended up being the CEO of one, the chief advisor to the other, and the chairman of the board of the third one. And I wrote to him and said, you know, what had happened. He wrote back and said, are you the least successful retiree in history? And I wrote back and said, well, you're a fat use, aren't you? You didn't stop till you were 95. So we've had a very good relationship. But I've worked with WWF both all around the world, but in the UK as their religious advisor since the mid-80s. And a new CEO took over about 2.5 years ago, called Tanya Steele, an amazing woman, really, really impressive person. But she'd not come from the environmental world at all. Come from Save the Children. And she was a refreshing breath of fresh air, to be honest. And I was invited to come down and talk to her. And she'd obviously been told by everybody in WWF, you know, 2020 is the year. It's the year of the environment. We've got 10 years to go before the world ends. You think, no, we've got 10 years before the Sustainable Development Goals end, which is not necessarily the same as the end of the world. And, you know, we've got a few sects that have predicted the end of the world, and they have to keep changing the date because it doesn't quite happen on time. So she was saying, so what will the faiths do? And I said, well, I think we'll probably carry on doing what we do anyway, because we think in generations. And she said, no, but what are you going to do about this anxiety? And what are you going to do about this, you know, etc. I said, I think we'll have a party. She went, what? I said, I think we'll have a party. She said, what else do you mean? I said, well, we know in our faiths, you can tell people to fast during Lent or during Ramadan or during Pansa, which is the Buddhist one. You know, every faith has a period where we're asked to kind of simplify, go deeper. She went, yes. I said, the trouble is the environmental movement just tells us to do that forever. We have a party at the end of each of those periods. We have Easter, and if you've ever been in a Muslim country for Eid al-Fitr, you'll know they know how to party. I said, you can't tell people just not to do things. You've also got to allow them to enjoy being alive. And there is a wonderful Jewish statement which says that if on the day of judgment, you will be judged and condemned for every legitimate pleasure you could have taken and did not. Note the word legitimate, ladies and gentlemen. I do not want you to go away saying, well, in church, they said, I would just make that point. So out of this came this idea, and she loved it. She's a Catholic from a very big Irish family. She really gets, you know, that whole point. So she said, so what should we do? And I said, well, why don't we actually hold a celebration? Because if something is worth saving, it's worth celebrating. And if it's worth celebrating, like this fabulous painting, it's worth saving. You've got to have both. Otherwise, it's a kind of neo-Puritanism. We really don't need another dose of that. And so we launched this program called Celebration Earth. And we were hoping to have a big event at St. Albans. We couldn't do it in the end, but we had sent film crews out around the world to capture stories. So if you go on the Celebration Earth website, celebration.org, or one word, Celebration Earth, and go to films, you'll see there's films from Cambodia of Buddhist monks who ordained trees as monks. This is based on a reading of the Lotus Sutra, which is one of the most beautiful Buddhist texts that I know, in which the Buddha says, if in order to save sentient beings from pain and suffering, the Buddha needs to become a Brahmin, a Hindu wise man, not a Buddhist one, a woman, because he was, of course, a man, a dog, and dogs are considered vermin in that world, or a tree, then he will. So we worked with the Buddhist monks in initially Thailand and Cambodia and other places. Said, well, if the Buddha could become a tree, could trees become the followers of the Buddha? And so there's a whole program that ordains trees, which means that for sort of 2 or 3 miles around that tree, no Cambodian will cut down the forest. So these trees are ordained in the most endangered environmental places. There's a little film about that. There's a film about the Ethiopian churches, 36,000 of them, and they are the last surviving places where indigenous trees survive, because the communists under the communist regime literally stripped the country of its trees, except around the churches. And there's a whole program of seed harvesting to restore, rebuild, replant the forests of Ethiopia. And then films about a new wonderful Hindu opera, the Durga opera, which explores the goddess Durga of the waters and how she comes back to help her people save the waters, and so on. And we did something that Prince Philip and I have been discussing for years. And that is, we get bombarded with the information about what is gone, what's died, what's gone extinct, what's lost forever. And there's a body called the International Union on Conservation and Nature, which produces the Red Data Book every year, and this lists the species that are most endangered, and it also lists the species that have gone extinct. And there's a long list, and there's 160 species that have gone extinct in the last 10 years, officially. Prince Philip and I have always thought we really wanted to create, and we were thinking originally of a physical one, a kind of memorial to the species that have gone, where we could go and mourn, where we could actually engage with the fact that we had killed these species. They were gone, primarily because of us. And that's the genesis for what you're about to see. A film that has gone out very widely, particularly through the States, on a new internet TV network called EarthX TV, and has had quite a reception. So bear with us as we take you to the little church where I sometimes preach, just outside Bath.
St. Lucia Skink. The Barbados Racer. The Pinta Island Tortoise. The Navassa Rhinoceros Iguana. Horns de Crie. The Santa Cruz Pupfish. The Catarina Pupfish. The CO2 Mad Tom. The Waiaotoa Forget-Me-Not. Vissiani's Star of Bethlehem. Adam's mistletoe. The desert beton.
I was the last of my kind. How I wish I was alone. For too long you've been blind. Another name on the list of those already. Church bells toll.
The Union Nactus.
For how long my heart breaks
Finch's
with
duck.
every chime. No shallow grave
The Bermuda flicker.
marks the end of the line. I was the last of my kind.
Is 160 a lot? Or is it actually remarkably few, given how much we've destroyed and how devil? You know, there's no context to that figure. The figures are only useful as the story in which they're set. I think our problem has been that we want to feel we are superior. So we've invented all kinds of stories and myths and legends in order to give us a sense of our special place. We've got to actually find a way of telling stories, not a story. We want to see plurality. We want to see a richness of possible stories to live in.
Capricorn rabbit wrap.
How I wish I was.
The Santa Maria weevil.
For too long you've been
The little flat-topped snail. The Samuel ground beetle. The Pico ground beetle. Christmas Island pipistrel.
The skies will always be.
The long-eared mouse.
Remember them. Remember me. All the days of me to see. I was the last of my.
The Rodriguez blue pigeon.
How I wish I was.
The North Island snipe. And the South Island snipe. Underwood's musurana. The Bermuda saw-whet owl. And Gunther's dwarf burrowing skink. The cunning silver side.
From an emotional point of view, it was not hard to connect to what I learned from Martin. These creatures were never understood. Some of them were never known about, and then they were just gone.
Thank you, our technicians, for that. What we were doing was we were taking one of the oldest traditions that we have, which is that when a community loses somebody, you ring the bell, and you ring one toll for each year of their life, and that tells the community that person has gone from us. The species, we did the full 160, were our neighbors. They were part of our community, and now they're gone forever. And yet we very rarely actually grapple with that. We don't engage with it. We don't mourn. And until you have mourned, you can't move on. Until you've acknowledged your role in their destruction, you can't be freed from being trapped in a sense of helplessness and guilt and obligation, or as most of us do, a kind of, oh, yeah, I've heard about that. So the ritual, which comes straight out of the Christian faith, of actually acknowledging that someone has gone, mourning them, ringing the death bell, that's what we used. And this has caught on, literally all around the world. So we're quite excited by that. But one of the great strengths that faiths have is we know how to do drama. We know how to do ritual. We know how to use words and symbols in a way that almost no other group does. And we also know something which I have to keep telling my friends in the conservation world. We are a narrative species. We are not a data species. I once had to go and speak at National Geographic's headquarters in Washington, D.C. as the first ever religious speaker at the gathering of environmental scientists all around the world, annual gathering, 5,000 of them. And I know I've been chosen to be there to be sort of exposed as, you know, what is all this nonsense and rubbish and why isn't this scientific? And I thought, well, I'll stall them. I'll stop them in their tracks. So I stood up at the very beginning, and there was a real sense of hostility. There had been a huge debate as to whether to invite me at all as a religious person to this. And I said, you know, I'm delighted to be here, et cetera, but can I just say I'm deeply disappointed in every single one of you. But hear this sort of intake of breath. You know, they were going to be disappointed about me because I was living in this mythological crap world. I said, I'm really disappointed. I've been here 24 hours. Been here 24 hours. I've talked to many of you. Not a single one of you has told me how much you weigh. Not a single one of you has told me how old you are. Not a single one of you has told me how tall you are. You haven't even told me how many calories you had for breakfast. You have given me no data at all. All you've done is tell me stories about how your granny used to be very religious, or how your uncle's a priest, or your aunt is a nun, or how, you know, you used to go to church, or you used to go to the synagogue, but you don't do it now, or, you know, your girlfriend, who isn't your wife, but she is very nice, and they're all getting on very well. And you say, you know, all you've done is tell me stories. You're scientists, you're supposed to give me data. Where's the data? Well, after the shock, they did titter. But we got fixated that somehow, if we show a pie chart, we'll convert somebody. I don't know anybody who was converted by a pie chart. We are changed by stories. And that was a story. That was a story. These suddenly, and now another conservation group has said they will create pictures of every single one of the species. So there will be my naming the species, there will be a picture, and then the bell will toll. Because they're so moved that suddenly these names begin to mean something. When we get challenged, as I often do, about talking about celebration, I tell a story. About 5 years ago, we did a project with Muslim, Hindu, and Christian colleagues in Kenya at the request of UNICEF, the UN's children's charity, and the Kenyan government. And there is an international education program called Education for Sustainable Development, ESD, Education for Sustainable Development. And we were asked, or we got into a position because we were working with UNICEF on working with faith. 50% of all schools around the world are still run by the religions, 50%. A third of all medical facilities. Without the faiths, COVID deaths would be in the tens of millions. So we created a faith-based education for sustainability toolkit. Very UN language here, you'll notice. And the person who was in charge of this, who's a Catholic sister from the La Retraite movement, who's one of my key staff members. She was one of the designers of this. She'd worked for many years in Cameroon and Chile running schools. She had a marvelous approach to education. She was asked to go to the international meeting of the Education for Sustainable Development program in Japan. It's operating in about 90 to 100 countries around the world. And when she was on the panel, she was asked very bluntly by somebody in the audience who was clearly quite disgruntled. And he just said, so what difference is there between a faith-based education sustainability toolkit and the ordinary one? And Mary went, we start by saying thank you. You start by telling everybody how bad it is. That's why we celebrate. That's why we celebrate. We know we should be thankful. We should be grateful for the astonishing generosity of creation, evolution, call it what you want. Generosity of God, again, for her, whatever you want. That generosity of life that we have been entitled to join. And that's why we created not only this last couple of years, Celebration Earth, but why we also, back in 1988, Prince Philip and I decided to help create a thing called Creation Time. We did this first by convincing the Ecumenical Patriarch of Constantinople, the first amongst equals in the Orthodox churches, to create a day in the calendar that would be the Orthodox Church's focus on the environment. And I was commissioned by Prince Philip to go and, of course, Prince Philip was baptized Orthodox, to go and negotiate with the Ecumenical Patriarch in Constantinople, Istanbul, to create this. Now, my middle name is Giles. I was named, by the way, after my father's first vicar, Canon Martin, who went mad. And then I was named Giles after my father's first church, which fell down. And I was christened in my grandfather's salad bowl because it didn't have a font and it cracked. You can read into that what you want. My middle name is Giles. And when we went for this meeting with the Ecumenical Patriarch and the Holy Synod, they said, well, what we're thinking of doing is making it the first day of our calendar, which starts on September the 1st. And I went, oh, that's great, because that's St. Giles's Day, isn't it? And St. Giles, and if you know, 7th, 8th century French hermit who lived in the forests and befriended all the animals. And one day a prince is hunting, a pagan prince is hunting, startles a pregnant deer. The pregnant deer rushes through the forest to St. Giles for sanctuary. Imagine the hunter is coming through the door there, drawing his bow on horseback, and St. Giles cuddles the pregnant deer and puts his hand, takes the arrow in his hand to protect the deer. So a wonderful saint for the environment. But of course, I'm Anglican, and the Orthodox kind of, Father John, even worse than the Catholics, assume that the Anglicans know absolutely nothing really about proper religion. So when I said, of course, that's St. Giles' Day, isn't it? They went, how do you know that? I didn't tell them my middle name was Giles until many, many years later, but it did not go down well. So we started there, and then, of course, the response from the Catholics was to say, well, hang on, no, that's all very well for the Orthodox, but we got our own, thank you very much, St. Francis' Day, October the 4th. And then the Protestant churches, Lutherans, Anglicans, kind of filled in the gap between, and hence Creation Tide came into being. So by celebrating, you can do amazing things, and by focusing on very often simple things. So in China, I'm a China specialist. I speak Cantonese, but I'm one of only 5 non-Chinese who can still fluently read classical Chinese. And so I've worked a lot with the Taoists in China, and one of the problems that the Taoists were finding with the growing wealth of China was that people were coming to bribe the gods. Now, this is a very long and ancient and honorable tradition in Chinese religion, on the basis that the gods are probably as venal as the emperor and his court. So as you have to bribe the emperor and his court, you probably have to bribe the gods. And so people were coming, as China got wealthier and the temples reopened, instead of just bringing a few incense sticks, they were bringing 1,000, or in some cases 10,000, and setting fire to them. And this was causing huge problems. Pollution was a real issue. It was causing terrible chronic bronchitis for many of the monks and the nuns in the temples, but it was also a very bad example. And so with the Taoists, about 10 years ago, we helped them develop a program called the 3 Lights Movement. You light 3 incense sticks, one for heaven, one for earth, one for yourself. Any more than that, and the gods start coughing. It has swept through China. And so much so that the Communist Party bring out every year a set of stamps for Chinese New Year, which is when people really go berserk and burn incense, and feature the three incense sticks on the stamps. A small thing, but it's about an attitude towards wealth. Just because you can afford huge amounts of things, does that justify you using them? And the Taoist answer very simply is no. And now if you go to a Taoist or a Buddhist temple, because the Buddhists took it up, you'll be stopped at the doorway and they will take from you the big bundles you've just bought. They will give you 3 and they return the others. And they've also developed, we've helped them develop a whole non-chemical incense program. So most of the incense sticks are now organic. Small things, taking a symbol which has been about abuse and excess and turning it on its head in the way that only a faith can do. Only a faith can do that. Now, we've all been through, and we're probably about to go back through something in the nature of lockdowns of various kinds. And I don't know about you, but I know 1 person who's died of COVID and 4 who've committed suicide because of COVID. We have created, on top of a deep fear about climate change and the deep fear about the planet that has led many, many young people to believe that there is going to be no future for them, we have added to that COVID fear. And I had the great honor of being asked to join the Pope's COVID Commission. I'm the only non-Anglican, sorry. Oh, damn, gave that away, didn't I, Father John? Damn, God help us. I'm the only non-Catholic on there, and I was very touched that Father John said to me, that's a terrible phrase, isn't it? Yeah, you're right, but you know, the historical context. I have actually said, I've worked very closely with the Catholic Church has things called dicasteries, which we would call a ministry. And Cardinal Turkson, this wonderful Ghanaian cardinal, heads the dicastery on the promotion of the integrity of human development. He's a very beloved friend, and I have said to him on a number of occasions that when he's ready, you know, we'll give him time. If he wants to return to the one true church, he'll be very welcome. He won't have to be rebaptized, you know, it was fine. You know, you can come back in. And he said, but he'll think about it. But I've joined this commission, and it's absolutely fascinating. We have people, we're only 30 of us, people from all around the world who are reporting back on what's happening in their own countries, in their own cultures, and trying to work out how you move forward. And part of it is by recognizing that when people say, we're all in this together, one of the most malicious lies I think we've ever heard. No, we're not. No, we're not. None of us here don't know whether we're going to have enough food tomorrow to feed our children. None of us know whether we're going to have a job. Certainly not in the way that huge communities have that doubt. Those who are already poor are being made poorer. The 1%, there's an Oxfam report about 2 months ago, 1% who are the wealthiest have doubled their income during the COVID crisis. So no, we're not in all this. We're not all in this. We're sort of sitting on a kind of, you know, nice beach, a few beers, little tables, some snacks, watching the ships sinking further out into the sea and those trying to swim from it drowning. But we're trying to pretend that we're really all in this together. We're not. We're also witnessing the fact that many countries, particularly in the developing world, are rolling back their commitments on zero carbon, rolling back their commitments, their laws on environmental protection for forests, for ban on mining, for coal, and so on the grounds they have to get the economy going. So our task, given to us by the Pope, is to come up with how we move forward, not build back better. Because if we build back, what are we building back into? A system that is totally unworkable. So it's a sense of, oh, well, you know, we'll get back to normal soon. No, no. We don't want to get back to normal. Pushed us to where we are now. We have to be going forward into something much, much more exciting, much more positive. And how do we do that? One of the things I've learned from the Catholic Church are the 4 key relationships. I remember this came from a Korean nun who we worked with in Korea on various projects. And she was the first person to put it to me so beautifully, and I share it with you. This is not from me, this is from her. It's a gift. And the 4 relationships are our relationship with God, our relationship with our neighbor. Those are fairly conventional. We kind of both know those, don't we? You know, that sort of, you know, okay, pretty kosher. Our relationship with nature, and our relationship with ourselves. Those are the 4 relationships we need to be able to be part of building something better, creating a different vision. So let me just take you into them. Build our relationship with God. I love that bit in Micah chapter 6, that wonderful, slightly crazed, well, they're all slightly crazed, the prophets, basically. But he's not the most crazy of them. That's Ezekiel. But he's you know, kind of on the spectrum a bit, really. But that wonderful phrase where he says, and what does God want? You act justly, walk humbly with your God. Do we? One of the most beautiful descriptions of God I came across, we were asked in 2015 by President Hollande, who was going to be hosting in September the climate change meeting, and he approached us in the faith environment world and said, "We need help. We've got to change the culture of the COP, because at the moment we have every nation comes to give as little as possible and take as much as possible." And he said, "I've watched how the faiths work in the kind of projects that you do. The faiths come wanting to know how much they can give." He said, "We've got to get that spirit." And so we initiated a very simple thing, which is that we got him to, or we wrote for him a letter that he sent to the 198 heads of state who were coming to the Paris COP. And we asked in the letter, we said, you know, for a moment, could you not be the president or the minister for the environment or the prime minister or whatever your post you are? Could you just for a moment answer a very simple question? Why do you care? Why do you care? And can you tell us why you care? Now, we thought that if we got kind of 1 out of 15, 1 out of 20 to reply, we'd be doing very well. Almost a quarter replied. It was that block that were able to go the extra mile, because they'd ceased being there purely for their national interest and were there because they cared. And one of the most beautiful stories, and this is about our relationship with God, was the Prime Minister of Indonesia, who wrote and he said, well, I care because of my grandfather. My grandfather was a sheikh, an imam, a Muslim priest. When I was a boy, he took me into the forest. Now you have to understand, if you actually live in a very forested area, they are very frightening places. You do not go willingly into the forest. It's a very Western romantic notion. They are dark places, they're dangerous places, you know, they're not safe. His grandfather would take him into the forest and they would walk deep into the forest, and then the grandfather would point up at the trees and he would say, there. Those leaves are the pages of the other Quran. That's why he cared. That's why Indonesia launched the first ever fatwas, the most powerful teaching within Islam of what is forbidden against the illegal wildlife trade and the illegal forestry trade. So our relationship with God, what is that relationship? And how does it fit in with the other relationships? So that one that we all know, our relationship with our neighbor, the Good Samaritan, is probably one of the most pivotal texts in Christianity. And it's quite unusual. There aren't many other faiths that have that story where the most despised becomes the greatest hero. You get it in Greek mythology. You get it in some elements of Hindu mythology. The Good Samaritan story is quite distinctly Christian. So there is that whole notion of our neighbor. And I think the other story that always touches me is the feeding of the 5,000. The feeding of the 5,000 in my book is a miracle. It's a miracle because, not because Jesus suddenly turned so much bread into so much bread that they could fill up 11 baskets, but because a little boy comes forward with what he has, and everybody would have carried some food. He shares what he has, gives it to Jesus, for Jesus probably, and Jesus then says, share it. What Jesus does is he unlocks in every single person generosity to their next door neighbor in that crowd. And they begin to go, well, yeah, actually, you know, I got some raisins, actually. I got some bread here too, and I got some water. And suddenly there's enough for everybody. More than enough for everybody. The miracle is what Jesus unlocks in our relationship with each other. That's the neighbor in a very visceral way. And we've seen that. We've seen that in the apps. We've seen that in the local communities supporting people who otherwise would be alone, would have no one to go shopping for them. That's been one of the most beautiful things that has come out of this. And I hope we hold on to that. And then our relationship with nature. Now, in the film, I talk very briefly that the young woman there is an extraordinary young woman. She was a reporter who came to cover the film for the film company. She's a Paralympic. She's a Paralympic archer. She was born with no hips and her feet fused together. She's an astonishing young woman. And she was completely captivated by a vision of both faith and of nature that she experienced there and has since sought baptism. But with nature. Now, what we tend to have done is we've put ourselves, and we do this as much in science as we do in any other way, at the center of everything. We are the meaning of everything. We give meaning to everything. I struggle with the environmental world because they come up with language that nobody ever uses. In fact, we have a strict principle in all the groups I've run and run at the moment, which is we never use a word unless it's been used in a poem. If it hasn't been used in a poem, nobody loves it. You would not believe how many environmentalists, who are most definitely not poets, have tried to write poems in which the phrase ecosystem deliverables and biodiversity appears. I can assure you there is not a living poet amongst the lot of them. But ecosystem deliverables, that's the basis on which the SDGs are predicated, Sustainable Development Goals. How useful is any element of nature to us? Not how useful is it to the rest of creation, evolution, nature, I don't care what you call it. So our relationship with nature and the great corrective for Christians about the sense that somehow, because of Genesis, that rather odd story in chapters 1 and 2, we're the center of everything, is to read Job 38:40. Job 38-40 is God basically monumentally cheesed off with this moaning midge called Job, who's kind of going, yeah, but you know, I mean, I thought I was your favorite. I just don't know. It's not fair. He really does sound like the worst kind of teenager, and you can see that God's had enough. God's just had enough. So he suddenly goes, and where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Come on, tell me, how did I do it? How did I do it? Where is the hail stored up? How does the leopard give birth How did the badgers breed? Come on, you're in charge. You tell me how to do it. How to do it? Oh, you don't know. I do. My God created them all. I love them. I'm fascinated by them. They're gorgeous. They're beautiful. They're wonderful. So don't tell me that you're the center of the universe. It's an amazing burst of God as the universal creator of everything. So our relationship with nature is also our relationship with God. And we've tended to separate the two out. In fact, we've subjugated nature to our whim. And then the final one, with ourselves. My mother, my grandfather was what we would now call a New Age con man. And he used to travel the seaside resorts of Britain in the 20s and 30s with a amazingly complicated, utterly spurious system for reading people's names by breaking it down into numbers and then linking it to Sumerian cosmology. He really was an amazing con man and did very well. But he abandoned my mother and her family and his wife when she was 14 in 1936. And as far as she was concerned, a pox on all spirituality and religion. She became an atheist. And she went on to work in psychiatric care and so forth. And my father met her at Frenchay Hospital, and he was there on the Christmas back when he was training to be a priest at Wells. Fell head over heels in love with her, and she refused to go out with him for 2 years because he was going to be a priest, going to be a vicar. But my father, as some of you will know who have been Palmerized, was very determined. And eventually she kind of gave in. But I think she got through her wedding because the hairdresser was sort of doing her hair on the morning, and she said, "So dear, you know, what's your hubby to be? What's he do?" She was kind of, see. And my mother went, going to be a vicar, and apparently the hairdresser froze in midair and went, "Well, you are the last kind of person I would imagine would marry a vicar." I think she got through the ceremony on that basis. But Mum, I mean, I grew up with my father who just knew God was love. That's it. God was love. And my mother who grew up saying, you know, an awful lot of this is tosh. And she had this terrible habit of making us, of reading, sort of emphasizing bits in Victorian hymns where the rhyming is torturous and slightly bends theology. As she used to point out, there are very few words that rhyme with God. And she would sit in the pew there, and she would psychoanalyze the hymns. And they don't do very well when you psychoanalyze the hymns. And at one point, we were singing one of John Wesley's more blood-drenched hymns. And in a loud stage whisper, she leans towards me, I'm 15, and she goes, "You know, dear, this is all about fear of menstruation." I go, "Mother, I don't even know what that is." So I grew up with my mother with a very sharp, critical sense of religion. And she said, "What is the problem?" And she worked in psychiatric care most of her professional life. She said, "What is the problem with Christians? Why don't they actually read their Bible properly?" And she said, "Well, what do you mean, Mum?" She said, "It says, love your neighbor as yourself." As yourself. We've often neglected that. And we've allowed it to fall into the hands of con and frauds, and we need to reclaim it. So those are the four key relationships: with God, with our neighbor, with nature, with ourselves. That's how we can move forward and be helpful to the world. Because if emotionally we haven't dealt with the problems we have, we're not much use. If we neglect nature or we see it purely as something utilitarian and useful, then we'll exploit it and destroy it. If we haven't got a firm, and I think a humorous relationship with God, I do think God has a very warped sense of humor, and we need to be able to handle that. And then if we haven't worked out what Jesus meant in the parable of the Samaritan and in the feeding of 5,000 about our neighbors, we are a bit lost. So just to finish, how do we do this? Well, one way is to change the world one meal at a time. We've done projects, and we're doing a big program now with the UN on what we call faith long-term plans. And Simon and I have discussed this as to whether the ecumenical parish and the eco churches here might join us in this. This is a program, it'll be the largest single program that the major faiths have undertaken on the environment ever. And we're asking each faith to do an audit of what they own, what they control, what they influence, and then to put that into a long-term plan, a 7 to 10 year plan, to launch a change of mood. So, for example, in the Catholic Church, there is the 7-year, 7-step plan of Laudato Si. And we're helping to flesh out this idea of how, going through things like, what are the assets we own? What is the wisdom we have? What is our youth work, whether that's in official schools or in formal education? What is our what is our media? What is our advocacy role? What is our celebration role? All these different aspects we're asking the faiths, and we have over 200 now, including the Church of England officially, and the Vatican, who are now working with us to look at what they own, what they influence, and to say, how can we take that, make that seeds of the future? We run 50% of all schools, a third of all hospitals. We are the 4th largest investing group in the world, and I head a group now called Faith Invest, which has nothing to do with underwear, which we've had to explain on 1 or 2 occasions. I'm from Faith Invest. Oh, is it Marks and Spencer's, or do you get it from Debenhams? No, no, no. It's not actually a vest. It's invest. Oh, yes. No, that's very nice, dear. Where do you put your vest in? No, 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 no. It's about investment. Oh, investment's fine. And we're working at the moment with about $1 trillion worth. There's $10 trillion worth of religious investments around the world in helping them move into not just disinvesting from fossil fuels or doing shareholder motion on things like Monsanto, but actually saying, okay, that's great and that's really important, but we could actually fund the new world we want to build simply from religious investment portfolios. We could fund all the alternative energy needs of the world. We could fund all the alternative food and agricultural processes that would be environmentally protecting simply from the religious investment portfolio. Simply. And the faith, on the whole, don't know. We had a call from the Church of England, the Church Commissioners, about 3 months ago, and we've been working with them. And they said, we've just done a little audit, and we've discovered we've got 100,000 hectares of forest in the UK. Do you know anybody who could help us as to what we should do with it? And of course we do, through WWF, through World Bank, through other groups, so we were able to link them. But it's actually getting to grips with what we own. We've for many years run a thing called Living Churchyards, which isn't quite as macabre as it sounds. It's more about the fact that you don't mow and hunt and in graveyards in the way you do elsewhere, and these are miniature ecosystems. So we're asking the faiths, and the response has been astonishing, to go deep into their teachings, to look at what they own, to look at what they buy. We as faiths supply 500 million meals a day. If we decide to buy organic, local, free range, fair trade, etc., we change the world. We've already done it with the Methodist Hotel in London, which is the Wesley, which is the first ever fully ethical hotel in the UK, because we applied Methodist principles to the building. Is all renewable material for the energy sources, for the food sourcing, etc. And they've actually created a whole organic, fair trade, free range, local food supply system, not just for them, but for all the major religious cafes, restaurants, retreat centers in London. We can do it. And we can do it by changing the world one meal at a time ourselves. So why do we celebrate? Because when you celebrate, you have to think also about the other elements of ritual, like mourning, like thanksgiving, like generosity, like forgiveness, like salvation, like redemption. All those words are what we need. But at the end of it, we need to be able to say, Hallelujah.
Martin, thank you for making us laugh and deeply moving us in many ways. So just 2 or 3 minutes, just if you're visiting here, the toilets, the community centre just next door, left-hand side. Questions as clear as one of Martin's great gifts is simplicity. It would be lovely to have, a clear sentence rather than a paragraph in our questions. But good use of this next half an hour or so. So just 2 or 3 minutes and we'll meet again at 8:30. Thank you much indeed. Just as Martin and I were going up there, it's actually Father Liam Slattery, who had a Lent course we did, a Catholic priest here, who said this to us: the only Bible must we ever read, Bible written on your life. What Bible written on your life? Interesting question. So I'll say to you, Martin, starter, what was your learning from the incredible privilege of being an ecumenical part of the COVID Commission? What was God's gift to you from that time? And what do you hope and pray that Commission's report, and give us the title as well, just because maybe the funny story about the title as well.
Yeah, indeed.
Okay, right.
Thank you. Just before I say that, I've been working with Prince Philip's religious advisor since 1985, and still correspond and see him every so often. When I first started with him and started planning some of his trips, often much against the wishes of the Foreign Office, who would ring up and say, could you possibly not take him there? And we go, no, actually, quite like to go. First meeting I had with him when we were planning a trip, which was to Kenya. No, I can't remember, but somewhere in Africa. And I showed him the timetable, and we went through all the things, and then he flicked through the pack and he went, where's the relief map? I said, relief map? Why do you need a relief map? He said, a relief map. I said, but what do you want to know the height of the mountains? And he said, no, where are the toilets? And if you've ever been on a royal trip, you will appreciate they are never left alone. So the moment you can go to the toilet and have some peace and quiet. One of my roles on the commission is not just to be the only Anglican, but it is to also bring to that group what the other faiths are doing as well as what the other Christian churches are doing. I've already mentioned the Ecumenical Patriarch. We work very closely with Orthodox churches. We're watching with great sadness our colleagues in Armenia at the moment. And I would ask you to pray both for them and for the Azerbaijanis, because that's a really bad situation there. So my job is to say to the very enthusiastic Catholics, this is fantastic. You do know that the Muslims are doing something similar, don't you? Okay. Oh, no, great, good, yeah. So it's to be that. Now, why do I do that? Why do I do what I do? Working with every major faith around the world, helping them to discover within their teachings and their practices their environmental wisdom that they've often lost or it's been ridiculed by others. I do that because of what my dad did here and what he did in Hartcliffe in Bristol, which was to create ecumenical projects. And he then went on to be the ecumenical officer for the Church of England. He was actually head of the board of Mission and Unity, and is often got misheard, and he was often introduced as the Lord of Mission and Unity, which he found quite amusing. And what he taught me was very, very straightforward. He came into the church during the war, and it was part for him of a vision of creating a better world. And he was scandalized by the divisions in the churches when humanity was crying out then for help. And then he watched the ecumenical movement kind of stultify. And I remember him talking to me when I was probably about 16 or 17. And he was really sad. And in fact, there came a point in the Anglican Methodist reunion talks where the then Bishop of London, not the last one, Charters, but one before, Leonard, betrayed the commission that had been set up by publishing an anti-report that led the Church of England not to vote for reunion. And my mother called us, all the children, we were all summoned home because Dad was threatening to resign his orders. He saw something he believed in crumble, or stultify, or be blocked. And he said, remember, when you are looking to unify, you have to celebrate the diversity. Because if you just say, we're really all the same, I have nothing to bring as an Anglican. You have nothing to bring as a Methodist. You have nothing to bring as a Catholic. You have nothing to bring as a Lutheran. And then unless we feel that we are bringing a treasure to the table, why would we come? And that's been very much the spirit of all my work. So when people say, oh, isn't it wonderful you're bringing all the religions together? I go, no, I'm not. What I am doing is helping the religions to walk side by side. But each of them has to have their own rationale. Each of them has to have their own strengths that are seen as a strength. And when Prince Philip and I designed the first event of the major religions in the environment, which took place in Assisi in '86, first time ever the environmental movement, all the major environmental groups, he was then the international president of WWF. We brought representatives of then 5 major faiths: Buddhism, Christianity, Hinduism, Islam, and Judaism. And nobody had ever done this before. And we had to come up with a phrase. And the phrase we came up with, the two of us, was, come, proud of what you bring, but humble enough to listen. And that's my approach to my involvement with the Commission.
And just, Martin, in terms, remind us of the title of the Pope's encyclical and what you hope will come from it.
He's only asking this because I told him something.
There we are. I like a bit of humour in Christchurch.
Yeah, okay, all right. It is called Fratelli Tutti, which is already a bone of contention. Rather, John and I were discussing this at dinner tonight because Fratelli means brothers. It can be interpreted as brothers and sisters, but the word itself, that's where the word fraternity comes from. This is why you have sororities as well. So it is a bit of controversial there. One of my colleagues is also the chair of the largest Catholic environmental movement, the Global Catholic Climate Movement, huge movement worldwide. And she had to do the initial interview with the dicastery, the ministry that had been behind some of this work, not all of it, which is the dicastery I work with. And at one wonderful moment, she was interviewing this representative of the dicastery. She said, so what are you hoping from Tutti Frutti? And it's ruined us. It's ruined us. It's ruined us. I have to talk. I've had to talk on the radio, and I've had to do stuff with Al Jazeera, and I've had to sit there and go, well, Fratelli Tutti, otherwise I'm going to say Tutti, which is rather like when Rowan Williams was made the Archbishop of Canterbury. I've known him since we were boys together. And I was interviewed, actually again by Al Jazeera. And the interviewer from Al Jazeera said, so, Mr. Palmer, what do you think it's going to mean for the church that Rowan Atkinson is now the Archbishop? And I said, well, probably the sermons will be better, but sadly, it's not him. So I think we have yet to find out how Fratelli Tutti is going to impact. We on the Commission and the dicastery knew almost nothing about this until a fortnight before. And there are bits in there that have come from our work, but it's very much the passion of Pope Francis. It's very much his vision. It's been brought forward because he feels the world needs to hear a different vision of the future. And it is very powerful on that. I don't think it'll have the same impact as Loud Out AC, because Loud Out AC was the first ever full encyclical on the environment and immensely powerful. And again, as I was discussing with Father John, it has more exclamation marks in it than the previous 10 encyclicals, because it's him saying, what are we going to do? Exclamation mark. How can we care for our common home? Exclamation mark. But I think to understand this Pope, it's great to read Laudato Si, but you also need to read Evangelii Gaudium, which is his massive critique of consumerist capitalism. Devastating. And those two documents, I think, are some of the most powerful statements about what needs to be got rid of in order that life can flourish. And if I was to put Fratelli Tutti in perspective, that's his vision of after the storm and the collapse that he has critiqued of economics and environment in his previous two encyclicals. This is the pathway out. And I think it's not easy, but it's there.
You mentioned very, very powerfully, you know, one person who died of COVID, 4 friends who've committed suicide through COVID. Question we received, how do we help the next generation to actually love themselves when we know in this town, huge increase in mental health issues with young people, of all ages, but young people?
Yeah. Well, I think by not mocking them, my generation has kind of, we've used this term snowballs. Snowflakes, sorry, snowflakes, snowballs is what I got wrong. Mustn't mix them up.
Yeah.
That was a bit of a cock up. We've called them snowflakes. We've pretended that they're not very deep, that they've not actually had to suffer anything, they've not had to go through anything. Oh my God. What happened to their exams? What happened to their school life? What happens to going to university? What happens about prospects for jobs? So I think first of all, we have to actually tell them they're quite extraordinary. And no wonder they're feeling down, because the world that they thought they were going to go into, which they were a bit kind of, not sure we really want this, probably isn't going to be there. But that does mean that they can be part of building the next one. And it will be different. They're, how different, I don't know. I head this thing called Faith Invest, and we're working with all the investment portfolios, not all, but we're working with about 200 or 300 different religious investment portfolios. And in trying to recruit someone to be the chief executive, and I've always worked in the charity world, we had a great debate in the development committee between those who came from the investment world and those who came from the charity world. Those from the investment world said, you've got to be offering at least £300,000 a year. Those of us from the charity world were going over our dead body. And in the end, we compromised. We set a salary at £160,000, which is the Prime Minister's salary. We then advertised, and we went through 3 processes of advertising. Each time we thought we found somebody, and each time when it got to the crunch, and we said, you do know that the salary, and these were, one was an Italian, one was an Indian, one was British. Each time we got to the almost appointment time, I would say, again, you do know it is only £160,000, choking on that because it was double anything I'd ever earned as head of an organization. And they would go, yeah, no, absolutely, that's fine. No, presumably it'll be topped up by the same amount as the bonus. And we went, no, there's no bonus. And then they go, okay, well, what about the benefits? We said, no, there are no benefits. This is it. And they went, oh, okay. What about shares? We said, it's a charity. The only one who's got shares is God. And each time, they were expecting £400,000 to £500,000 a year. And each time we challenged them. So the first one, Italian woman from Zurich, she said, I've got a very comfortable lifestyle. I have no intention of compromising it. The second one was willing to do it for that, plus a share of money that he would raise through foundations, which we had to squash as well. But he wanted to do 3 days so he could keep 2 days as a consultant. And at the very last moment, I said, by the way, Mark, who are you consulting for at the moment? He said, BP. So we had to point out to him why that wasn't going to work. And then the final one gave me the phrase that, to me, is why we have got to have a different story. Stories. She said, I said to her when she said, well, what about the bonus? What about the benefits? What about the shares? Okay, then in that case, I'll top up my salary to 400,000 from the first money that I helped raise. And so I said, no, you won't. It doesn't work like that. And she went, and I said, look, Jasmine, we chose you because in the interview you said, I want to give back. She went, yes. Well, you don't want it to cost me anything. If that isn't why we're in this dire mess, I was going to use another word, but mess is much politer. I don't know what else is. So what we have to show is that there are other ways of being economic beings. And that does mean that as churches, we need to start investing in products and companies and organizations that actually produce what we need, not for greed. And we can do that. We've done it in very small ways. So many churches have done tradecraft, tier fund. That's peanuts. Peanuts. If every one of us decided that at least 1 day a week, we would only buy from local producers who meet the kind of criteria that we as Christians, who know that this planet is a gift from God to all creation, if we would just do that, and that spread through the church, we would actually fund the rise. And this is according to the Side Business School with whom we work in Oxford. We would help give rise to about 10 to 15,000 new businesses. 1 day a week. So the solution lies with us.
Following on from that, before I ask this question, I've got on my desk, Lord, convert the word begin with me. Begin with me. So a lot of conversion to do in me and in us. Question is raised, Martin, how can we approach turning celebration into anything politicians will understand if all they look at is money and helping poverty?
Well, yeah, that's an interesting one. In 2009, the UN came to us and said, the Copenhagen COP, climate change meeting, is going to be a disaster. All the nation states are going to fall short. We're not going to be able to get a deal. Can the faiths set an example? And we said, yeah, I think we can. So we ran a program for a year and a half on these faith long-term plans. And we had 64, and we've got nearly 200 now. 64 major faith organizations made commitments. And they have followed through on those commitments, on investments, on youth work. You know that there are 400 million young people in youth organizations around the world. 400 million, of which 4 are faith-based. Did you know that? Do we use that? Yeah. How ridiculous. Any other organization would give their eye teeth to have that contact. So we developed all sorts of programs, and new things came out like EcoSeek, Eco-Islam, the Bhumi Project, which is the major Hindu network, the Taoist Ecological Temple Network, the Shinto Association for the Environment, all kinds of groups. But also they began to move assets, they began to create youth clubs and open things, et cetera, et cetera. And when we were interviewed, because we held our event at Windsor Castle with Ban Ki-moon, the then Secretary General of the UN, Prince Philip, and it was 3 weeks before the Copenhagen COP. When we were interviewed, or our various delegates were interviewed, and they said, so, what if the governments don't make a deal? We said, well, we're going to do it. The faiths are the largest organized sector of civil society other than education, and we run 50% of education. So if you want an alternative, a civil society alternative, it's the faiths and education. We do not have to follow the nation states. They need to be following us. So I hope that in November next year at Glasgow in COP26, why are we having COP26? COP26? To solve an urgent crisis? 26? I was at Kyoto in 1997. We knew what we had to do then. We signed a deal, which the Americans sabotaged and the business community turned into the sale of indulgences, carbon trading. It was sabotaged. 26? Anyway, it's highly unlikely that the major governments will stick to their deals. So it's up to us, civil society.
Should international aid policies be reviewed in the light of the current situation? International aid policies.
Ooh, that's a good one. Cardinal Turkson, who is this wonderful, possibly might be the first actual black pope. We've had popes from North Africa, but they were all Greeks. That was a very long time ago. Cardinal Turkson set me a challenge when we started creating Faith Invest. And he said when he was Archbishop of Ghana, and he had, I think, 8 dioceses, and this was in the early beginnings of this century, what he most wanted to do was to train, was to have a core in each diocese of people who've been trained to think entrepreneurially. Because he said, all our projects, women's cooperatives, farmers groups, local projects producing food or producing handicrafts or creating alternative energy sources, all sorts of things like that the church was supporting was all done by grants. And he said the trouble with grants is, first of all, the maximum you can usually get from a northern source, whether that's the Catholic Church in CAFOD or Caritas, or from something like DFID or CEDA, which is the Swedish Development Agency or anything like that, is 3 years. And 3 years is not very long. Basically, you've spent probably 18 months trying to get the wretched stuff in the first place. Then you have to get going, and you have to set up the structures, and you have to report on a monthly basis, and blah, 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 and you have to appoint new staff to do it. And then by the time you get to the end of year 1, you're already thinking, oh my God, we've only got 2 years to go, less than that, because we need to know whether we've still got money by the end of the 2nd year, so we don't have to appoint, we can appoint people for more than 1 year beyond that, and it doesn't work, it doesn't work, it does not work. And he said, what I wanted, but I couldn't find anybody who could do this, was to train my clergy and laity to think entrepreneurially. How can we take a project and make it self-sustaining because it actually earns an income? And we charge a real price for what we produce. There was no such structure. And so when we started this process back in 2017, he was our keynote speaker along with the Secretary General of the UN. He said, can you create a program that will help me to train, to ask every single diocese in the world, all 3,000 of them, to set up a development team that looks at creating business plans, not for every project, but we're not going to have this kind of grant for much longer. And so we have, and with the UN, we've set up this terrible title. It's called a Massive Open Online Course, a MOOC. I mean, who comes up with these initials? Honestly, it makes you despair. It's not as bad as my Muslim friend. My Muslim friend, Fazl Khalid, who has been the pioneering person on Islam and the environment, has the worst taste in acronyms I know. So when, about 30 years ago, we were helping him to set up the first big Muslim environmental organization, he came to me one day and he said, Martin, I've got it. World Islamic Federation for the Environment. I went, Fazlum, that spells wife. He went, no, Whiffy. I said, no, Fazlum, trust me, it's wife. No, Whiffy. I said, Fazlum, it's wife. Oh, yeah, okay. So he went away, and then he came back with the World Islamic Network on the Environment. I went, Fazlum, you're there already, aren't you? It spells wine. He went, oh, bugger. Anyway, he ended up creating something called the Islamic Federation for the Advances in Environmental Science, called IFES. I mean, I do give up. We have to create other models from this dependency model because it's a north-south one. It's not going to last. Our mainstream religions, all of them, are shrinking in terms of regular contributions. Governments are having to put huge amounts of money into bailing out their own people. They did exactly the same thing in 2008 and led to a massive crash of development aid. So there has to be another way. And part of what Faith Invest does with the UN, we've created a Laudato Si entrepreneurship program for training young Catholics to move into business, to work with communities that are otherwise have no access to entrepreneurial skills, to investment. We work with major religious philanthropies. We've done a similar scheme for Hinduism and a similar scheme for Taoism, Buddhism, and Confucianism in China. We have to be part of the different model. We cannot continue on this same model. It does not empower. It makes dependence.
We're going to end not with any pie charts or any data, but two stories to inspire us as we seek together to build a better future. One of our phrases here in Swindon is, may the Lord baptize our imagination. A wonderful story about the reporter who was so moved by that film which she came to do professionally. She's now being baptized into the Christian faith. But last Advent here, we had a Window into the Divine icon exhibition. And lots happened in the last 5 months. Pretty much it was just as Martin came on that webinar, the Black Lives Matter came into whole orbit in Bristol. And this icon was available last year, part of it, but Sue has produced, Sue's going to the front just briefly. I'm going to share now a microphone with Martin. Martin, I'll ask a couple of questions about this amazing icon and the gift to us.
You may have to lean into my chest a little bit, but it's probably preferable than the other way around. So Sue is an artist, and she said, I don't do speeches, so I'm going to interview her, if that's all right, just briefly. Sue, what were you already creating, and what was the genesis of that? Because I know you've got this very powerful creation theme, and you've done that before. What was your inspiration? What was where did you derive that image from?
So the first time I did this icon, the image of Christ was taken from a very old icon in Mount Sinai. And because with icons, you're supposed to hark back to older icons. So that I did that. And normally you have a border around the edge, a red border, because it's a view through to the divine. But I really wanted to put creation in, and creation is borderless. So I took the border away and I put it as a ribbon round. And I started to put just almost like, they're like my Google tattoos, basically, and paint in the gold of creation. And I wanted the colours of creation. And I've called it the first Bible was creation, because traditionally the icon would have a Bible held closed or open. We won't go into that now. And instead, Christ is holding creation because it's the first Bible.
Now, in the Orthodox tradition, and I've had the joy of working with them for many years, we are not viewing the icon. The icon is viewing us. Take us into this Christ who is looking into us. What do you hear?
That we are part of creation. We're not just looking at creation. We are part of it. So although Christ's holding it in his hand, we depend on creation to exist. otherwise we wouldn't be here. And God, and really Christ is holding. I put DNA in here. Look as well, and I put mitochondria. Have you heard of mitochondria? They're the energy cells that produce everything, and you get them from your mother. Only, but that's probably too much for you.
No, not at all.
So, what was your question again? Did I answer it?
So, we are not viewing, we're being viewed.
Yes.
What do you hear Christ saying out to us?
This is beautiful. Look after it.
And then the black image, where did you derive that from? Your own sources, roots, or from other iconography? Because there are black icons.
I couldn't find any black icons. I Googled a lot. I couldn't find any. And with iconography, there's a geometry to the face that you're supposed to adhere to. So I had to intentionally throw that away, aside, and go, I need it to look like black features, not just colour it black, because that's not respectful, I don't think. So there's someone I work with, and he wouldn't let me take his photo. He's got beautiful chiseled, I could have just done that. But anyway, so I ended up Googling a few images and meshing some together. But yeah, I really enjoyed doing him, really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Sue.
Thank you.
Those at home, I don't know, I'll be able to get a close-up on the actual icon? Have we been able to do that? Yeah. It'll go up on the website. Okay, sorry, Simon. Thank you, Sue.
As we're coming into land now, two final questions which Martin knows about. And I think if I have one word or two words, how I'm feeling about the whole pandemic, it's this connectedness and the ecumenical challenge of our times. So you did hear Martin, in all humility, one of only 5 people able to translate classical Chinese. But over supper time and that amazing pear crumble, thank you, Rodrigo Senior, for the pears once again today, unbelievable recipe. In terms of breakfast, we start up for the Friends of Christchurch, there could be a real money for the future to come. But in terms, tell us this, I want people to be encouraged that we are the thoughtful capital of this country, you know, Swindon, ahead of Oxford and Bath and all great things being done in Bristol, the thoughtful capital. Tell us, please, the story, the Taoist story about thoughtfulness, which you reminded me of at supper time.
Okay. Has anybody actually asked what it is that all Swindonians think about? I'm intrigued by that. I mean, you can be thoughtful, but, you know, some of the thoughts I have, I'm not sure I would want necessarily to celebrate.
Practical actions, I think.
Practical actions, something like that. Very good, very good. There's a wonderful Taoist story, and the Taoists are the traditional religion of China, coming out of the shamanic traditions there. They believe that the Tao is essentially the way of nature. It's the way of the universe, and that if we choose to be in tune with it, things will happen, will go well. If we ignore it or struggle against it, we bring down our own crises in ourselves. And there's a story told of a rather grumpy Taoist hermit who had been living up in the mountains, and he'd set off on a journey, and he'd miscalculated, he got caught in bad weather, he didn't have enough food, he didn't have enough water, he was dehydrated, it was incredibly hot. He stumbles down into this little valley. There's a very poor farm, very humble, sort of falling down little farmhouse. There's the farmer outside with her children, and he stumbles up to her, and he wasn't very polite. He goes, "I want water, give me some water." She goes, "Okay, sit down, sit down, sit down." And she goes to the well, and she draws some cold water from deep in the well, puts it into a glass, and then he spots her doing something. So he sat over there, he spots her bending down and picking up some pieces of straw and dust and dropping it on top of the water. So she gives him the water, and he looks at this, and to drink it, he has to sort of go, and he's really angry. So as he leaves the valley, he curses her. He calls upon the gods of the valley, gods of the Tao, to curse her, and storms off. And about 20 years later, he happens to come back into that valley, and he is gobsmacked. The valley is full of amazing crops. The orchards are almost breaking their boughs with fruit. The tumbled down farmhouse is now 5 beautiful farmhouses, beautifully thatched. There's children running around, clearly grandchildren running around. There's a sense of well-being. It's gorgeous, it's wonderful. And he is absolutely flabbergasted. And he goes up to the woman. She goes, "Oh, I recognize you. You were the hermit who came here. Thank you so much." He goes, "What for?" She said, "Well, look at the blessing you brought us." And he said, "No, I cursed you." She said, "Why?" He said, "Well, I saw you. You got the water, and then you put dirt on top of it." She said, "Yes, of course I did." He said, "What do you mean, of course you did?" She said, "Well, if you just drunk it straight away, given how dehydrated you were, how hot you were, it would have killed you. So that was to make you think about each sip and take it slowly." And he went, "I get it. The gods knew why you did that. That's why you're blessed."
Maybe the first Taoist story you've heard in the Old Town Partnership in 51 years. Martin, in terms of your tradition, our tradition, many of us here tonight, in all that you've been involved in this year personally, and you remember your 5 friends, 1 COVID died, 4 have died from suicide. What is Advent to Christmas going to mean for you this year to renew your hope personally? And what maybe you want to say to us, perhaps to help us in our preparations here? We want people to be safe, etc., but we want people to encounter comfort and joy. Church of England's phrase, comfort and joy.
Okay, quite a few years ago, I was asked by, I think it was ITV, asked myself and an imam to come on the show on December the 23rd to talk about the commercialization of Christmas. And this poor interviewer didn't quite get what she was expecting. My brother Nigel, who some of you may remember, who has special needs, when my parents moved to Dronfield and my father went back to his first love, which is being a parish priest, the family, we opened a little bookshop that Nigel ran. And I know from Nigel's bookshop that he made, in the month of Christmas, in Advent, in December, he made 1/4 to 1/3 of the total income for the year. So when I was asked first, Mr. Palmer, what is your feeling about the commercialization of Christmas? I said, I think it's fantastic. And this poor interviewer, you could see going, "That's not in the script." And she said, "Why?" And I said, "Because it supports thousands of artists, potters, carvers, little book printing companies, card companies. It's basically how we have a creative artistic industry." Ooh. I said, and I told the story about my brother. And then so sort of in desperation, she turns to the Muslim leader and she says, but surely from a Muslim perspective, this commercial, he said, "No, I think it's fantastic." He said, "We get a Christmas tree, we wrap up all the presents, we have crackers. It's fantastic." He said, "You should see what we do at Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha. It's great. We all join in, everybody's nice." And she was just completely flummoxed. So what do I want for this Christmas? I want you all to go and buy loads of stuff, but not from Amazon. I want you to go out and I want you to go on the internet. I want you to find the small struggling bookshops. I want you to find the producers of really weird looking sweets. I want you to find the artists whose stuff you look at and you think, "Ooh, well, Aunt Ethel would like that, and if she doesn't, tough." I want you to be generous with the money you would have spent anyway, and support the kind of industries, the kind of projects, the kind of products that we need to be getting more of in order that the young people have something to go and work. In Ireland, I have an Irish colleague, and she says Dublin is dead. She lives at Maynooth, just outside Dublin, about 45 minutes outside Dublin, but she said all the sleeper towns have come alive. We've got new cafes, new restaurants, little bookshops, stores of office materials. You know, all kinds of things have come into being. So be generous at Christmas, be a good consumerist, buy lots of lovely gifts, but don't do Amazon. Do it by going and finding your local bookshop and online, or if you're able to go and visit them, buy the hardbacks, not the paperbacks. Put your money where you want the world to go and enjoy Christmas. And if you can come here, alleluia. If not, send a Christmas card to every group that you buy from and thank them for being there, for being creative, and wish them a Merry Christmas and pray God a happier New Year.
Great answer. Martin, thank you very much indeed. Martin has so many gifts, but I just want us to really make sure we understand this gift of humour in these very challenging times, you know, humour and joyfulness. But don't tell ourselves too seriously. You know, be careful how much time you watch the news, but the title is really important, Celebration Through Anxiety and Fear. Thank you very much indeed for this journey we're on together, continuing journey. And just as we finish tonight, if walls could talk, so it was actually Anne took a very sad funeral this morning, had a young mother who died. Her daughter, Mia, was next of kin, just 17 years old. And I want you to be aware, especially as you leave this church, of the lights of Christ Church on. Without wanting to say too much about one of the Friends of Christ Church projects, has been working with Mark Bridgman, who's Brian Bridgman's son, on an updated version of the book that was called The Lady on the Hill, have a new title when it's published, probably now beginning of next year. But I know Mark was, in his research, was very empowered, inspired by the light on the hill. And so as you go, I want you to sleep well tonight. I want you to take some of the stories away. And again, if you're at home webinar, please drop us a text or an email or on social media with your reactions to this, how we can work together with Celebration Earth. Go on their website. But I'm just going to end by reminding us of the words actually our choir will sing a week on Sunday at a choral evensong. We're inviting back those who've been bereaved over this last year to a special service at 4 o'clock, and always very moving service. But as I think, Anne, of Helen and her family today, moment of quiet as we pray for you, Martin, for your family, who's gone before us, including your dear mum and dad, and the challenge of celebration in these days. And you think of what light does on a dark night. Lighten our darkness, Lord, we pray. In your great mercy, defend us all perils and dangers of this night. Love of your only Son, our Saviour, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you for coming, and God bless you. Safe journeys home. Thank you much indeed.